Good morning. How the devil are you doing this fine day? Just going to reiterate what I've just said in the chat. Good morning, Ken Hatcher, by the way. Get well soon to Peter McKenna and to Mrs. Jim Turner, who apparently is in the fracture clinic having her toe looked at. Wish her well for us, would you, Jim? Lots of other people here as well. Gary and Dan and Mark and Footy and Peter and Mick and probably other people as well. We'll come to all that in just a second. Yeah, it was a mixed bag of news yesterday. Although it was inevitable at this point, the news that Squibb Group has actually been wound up after 75 years in business is a blow, not only to the company, the family, its employees, and the supply chain, but to the wider industry as well. As I've said previously, Squibb was a titan of the UK demolition industry, and we will all mourn its passing. On a happier note, unexpected though it is, Martin O'Donnell has left KDC Contractors after 34 years of service to join PP O'Connor, who are just up the road. Quite a wrench, I would imagine, to start anew after 34 years with the same company. But KDC's loss is PP O'Connor's gain. Martin is, without question, one of the most honourable and decent guys in the UK demolition sector. So we wish him very well in his new role. It's almost time to start the show, but I wanted to share something with you. First of all, I wanted to remind you that tomorrow night, we're doing that. It is our prediction show 2024. And just so you know, I did not pose for that photograph. That's purely artificial intelligence at work. I don't know quite what it was trying to achieve, but I quite like it. We are due to start at 7 p.m. So please make sure you arrive armed with your own predictions for what the industry has in store for 2024. As I said, that's tomorrow night. But tomorrow daytime, I'll be releasing a new article that explains exactly why I will not be renewing my CCDO card, which is due to expire in January. I'm not retiring, but my card certainly is. I'm going to place the story behind a paywall, actually, mainly because I just can't be asked to deal with comments from training providers on why I'm setting a bad example. But if that sounds like something you might enjoy, then I'll provide you with a link tomorrow on the show. And just one final thing, which is kind of off to one side, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let me have a look. I need to find the right link. It's here somewhere. Just talk amongst yourselves. I think I found it there. There we are. There's been rolling news coverage of the conflict in Gaza for the best part of 2 months now. But do you feel any of the wiser on the background to the conflict and what it means to actual people? I don't mean the warmongering leaders, but actual people. I rewatched an episode of Parts Unknown last night on YouTube featuring chef Anthony Bourdain, who sadly is no longer with us. And over the course of about 40 minutes, he sits down with people, actual people, real living people from both sides of the Gaza conflict. And it is fascinating, insightful, and very, very sad as well. So if you'd like to understand a little more background to that, you can find a link over on the chat. It's over there now. Chris Ford, good morning. Gary Muirhead has just said, I don't think any of my predictions from last year have come true. I don't think it, well, I think I may have got one or two right, but yeah, it's very, very good. And there you are. There's Peter McKenna saying, I've watched that. Quite informative. It really is. Getting it from a human perspective rather than a media perspective, so much the better. Now, without further ado, it is that time. So I'm going to roll the intro, post the question of the day, and get this show on the road. Just going to say a very quick good morning to the gorgeous Carly Northwood, who is watching over on LinkedIn. She came through as LinkedIn user on my list. Couldn't work out who it was. Just been to LinkedIn. It's Carly. Morning, Carly. Thanks for joining us. Now, it is Tuesday, the 5th of December. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. I am your host, Mark Anthony. In today's show, we're saying bonjour to a small but perfectly formed new model from Manitou. There's no business like snow business for Bobcat. Get set for the Kentucky Bridge Blast, and Case cleans up the Ivory Coast. Plus, someone is for the chop from Madame Guillotine. It'll make sense when we get there. But first, we're going to peer back through the mist of time to see what was happening on this day in history. I was going to say a very quick good morning to Glenn Johnston and to Andy Bullock, who have just arrived as well, and to Chris Ford, who is also there. Good morning, my fellow warriors of demolition. Warriors of the Wasteland. Anyone remember that song? Frankie Goes to Hollywood? Never mind. Now, on this day in 1792, US President George Washington was re-elected. With his wooden teeth and everything. In 1848, American President James Polk triggered the gold rush by confirming that gold had been discovered in them there hills in California. Now, you think we're being awfully clever right now. In 1893, an electric car was built at the Dixon Carriage Works in Toronto. It could travel 15 miles between charges. 1893. In 1952, London found itself in the grip of the Great Smog. Steel winds and cold temperatures trapped pollution from coal smoke, and it's estimated that more than 8,000 people died as a result. In 1974, the final episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus aired on British television. In 2008, O.J. Simpson was sentenced to 33 years for kidnapping and armed robbery. Nothing about the stabbing and stuff. And in 2021, I had no idea of this. I was probably preoccupied with humans at the time. In 2021, a pair of hippos at Antwerp Zoo in Belgium tested positive for COVID-19. Who knew? Now, before we get into the real meat of the show, let me very quickly remind you of our question of the day. Yeah, our question of the day is one of mine again, actually, and it is this. Have you ever met one of your heroes or idols? And if so, who was it? Where was it? I've been very, very fortunate indeed. I've met three of mine. I met England World Cup winner and former West Ham star, Geoff Hurst. I've met him a couple of times, actually. I've met Ultravox singer and songwriter, the man behind the Do They Know It's Christmas song, Mid-Year. Best of all, well, for me personally, I've also met author Stephen King, my favourite author. I've met him. Now, you'd think that would be good, but I was like a teenage girl. But I was okay with Geoff Hurst. I don't know why. I was absolutely fine with him. But Mid-Year, I was at a book signing. It was part of a Guildford Literary Festival, and he was there signing his book called If I Was. And he did a bit of an acoustic set with just him and a guitar, and he was taking questions. We had a right old chinwag while he was up on a stage and I was down here. Nobody else seemed to have any questions, so it was just me and him firing questions and answers back and forth. And then came the time for the book signing, and all I could say was thanks. And then I queued for an hour to get a book signed by Stephen King, because he is my absolute literary hero. Exactly the same. I wanted to thank him for The Shining and Carrie and Salem's Lot and The Green Mile and Shawshank Redemption, and all I did was just hand him a book and say thanks, like a girl. What about you? Have you met your idols or your heroes? If so, let us know who they are and where you met them in the chat, please, and we'll come back to that at the end of the show. Speaking of the show, shall we start it? Okay, people, we're going to start with something sleek, smart, sexy and small. Not me. This is from the fine folks at Manitou. Ladies and gentlemen, please say bonjour to the stunning new MT420 telescopic handler. Sacre Bleu and Mon Dieu. That is one slick-looking telehandler. Or as they say in France, très magnifique. That's it. I'm done for French now. What did you all make of it? Is that new Manitou hot or is it not? You know the score. That's what we say right about these times. You've just seen a new machine. Is it hot or is it not? Let us know in the chat. Now, I normally save the questions of the day answers to the end of the show, but I did want to leap on this one because Mick Nort has just said, I once met iconic Dutch professional footballer Johan Cruyff in Leopoldsburg in Belgium in 1992 when organising a farewell function at his restaurant. To my eternal shame, I didn't realise who he was until later. Now, it's funny you should say that, because I was reading just this weekend, apparently there was, I'm fairly sure it was when Johan Cruyff passed away, one of the UK newspapers published a full-size photograph to mark his passing. Only the photograph was actually of a player called Robbie Rensenbrink, who used to play for Anderlecht, looked a bit like Johan Cruyff, not completely like him, but looked a bit like him. Yeah. They didn't know who he was either. So, yes, well done on that. Now, Neil Edwards, stand by your beds, people. Is it going to be good news? Is it going to be bad news? Let's have a look. Neil Edwards, good morning. Morning, Mark. Stats all done for November 2023 and Builders Conference Building Information researched and awarded over £4 billion worth of new contract awards across the UK. It's been a while since Neil has been on the show, at least in person, but you will know that 4 billion was the benchmark that we were working towards back in the day. So despite all that is going on and all the ups and downs within the house building market, £4 billion. Thank you very much indeed for that, Neil. Send us off into Tuesday first. Let's do Tuesday first. It will send us off with a bit of a smile on our face. Now, I think we've had some agreement that Glenn Johnston reckons that new Manitou is hot. Peter McKenna says goes one stage further. Bloody good machine. Gary Muirhead says hot. Dan Cullen says it's hot too. And Jim Turner says hot. It will be great around my little yard. Looks like it's going to be a popular little machine. That, and there's Neil Edwards. A good news story. Doesn't that make a lovely change? Doesn't it make a lovely change? Right. We'll be right back. Now, I need to answer this question. Out of that 4 billion, how many will come to fruition, though? My guess, given the fact that they've actually let the contracts, is pretty much all of them. There are, what is the expression? There is opportunity for a slip twixt cup and lip. I realise that. I realise some things can go wrong, but bear in mind, I can't remember the exact figure, but I think Neil Edwards always used to say it was something like 20-odd weeks between the contract being awarded and actual putting a shovel in the ground. So all of these, that 4 billion will be next year. And Neil Edwards has just said, there you are, all of them will come to fruition. So good news. And before anybody ruins it, I'm going to press another button to crack on. Here we go.
If you are enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the show. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.
We're off to Kentucky next, home of the Kentucky Derby and of some of the finest sipping whiskey in the whole wide world. Turns out they have a bit of a way with bridge demolition too. I would imagine there's a few fish in Kentucky with a bit of a headache and concussion right now. Also wonder if we'd be allowed to drop a bridge into a river here. My guess is probably not, because we're not allowed to do anything here. Going to throw over to the chat. I think that's probably Carly Northwood saying, great to have some up-to-date and accurate stats. Thank you, Neil. Yeah, thank you indeed. Mick Norton, going back to the Manitou. I don't think Manitou have an automatic recognition between machine and attachment electronically or the operator a risk of overturns. Vastly reduced, which is a negative aspect in my view. Merlot lead the way in this on this technology via a tag system. Good to know. Chris Ford, I'm in agreement with you. When they drop a bridge into the water, I think it must be a right ball lake to remove the rubble. I totally agree with you. Let's have a look. Andy Darvell is struggling for a signal today over in the waste tip, but Andy, you're welcome nonetheless. That's an awesome blow up. I wonder if any fish got injured. I would imagine a fair few. Now, a little more seriously, there is Mick Saunders saying, I read the HSE stats this morning, still not great news and way too many deaths. I find myself a bit confused and befuddled by the HSE stats, because they've released a press release today and a statement saying, you know, here's the industrial workplace injuries and fatalities over the past year. And they are recorded, or they've reported 45 fatalities in the UK construction, or the combined UK construction and demolition industry. I wanted to see if that was up or down on the last set of figures. Well, they released a set of figures back in March that also said 45. So what I can't understand is whether the figures ran to March and they're now just announcing the whole set of stats, or whether there were 45 up until March and there's been none since. I don't believe that can possibly be the case. But 45, obviously 45, way too many. And it does feel oddly like we have hit some kind of barrier. You know, over the years, I've reported on 100 fatalities, 70, 50, down to 40. I think the lowest I've ever reported on was about 35, but we seem to have just got to 35, 40, 35, 40. It always seems to be about the same figure. I don't know quite what we need to do in order to get it past that. Now, Ken Hatcher, stand by your beds. Neil Edwards has also said 94 million of new contract awards in Welsh Wales. Fantastic news. Fantastic news. A long while since they've had any good news down in Wales. My guess is that probably still isn't road related, but hey, we'll take it as we can get it. What have we got? Yeah, Peter McKenna says still way too many deaths. One will be too many, but 45. It's hard to say it's anything but a disgrace. You know, and when you really look at it, and I've already mentioned this, I've got an article coming out tomorrow that explains why I am basically relinquishing my CCDO card that I've had for the past 5 years. Set my card aside, but bearing in mind all of the cards that we have in place, all of the training courses, all of the competence cards, and yet we are still killing as many people today as we were 10, 15, 20 years ago. We have not progressed. And on top of all of that, we've seen again today coverage from various charities. Our suicide rate still remains remarkably and ridiculously high. We're not addressing the problem. Let's have a look. Peter McKenna says, falls from height still major cause of fatalities. It was the biggest cause in the latest set of stats. Yeah, absolutely. And Mick sort of says, yeah, totally agree with you there. I'm not sure when they stop or start. Does seem a little bit unclear. And what I did find odd is I'm fairly sure that it's around about this time of year that we normally report on the annual stats. So quite what the March stats were all about, I honestly can't remember. One is bad enough. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I know I sound like a broken record, and for that I can only apologize. But we are now, where are we? We're probably 10 weeks away from the 8th anniversary of the worst demolition disaster in UK history, the Didcot disaster, in which 4 people killed, and that investigation is still ongoing. And I am not saying the HSE is in any way responsible for any of the 45 people that have died in the UK demolition and construction industry over the past 12 months. However, when you've got a regulatory body that moves at a snail's pace, roughly the speed of continental drift, how can you possibly hope to learn from past mistakes? I arrived this morning feeling all upbeat. I'm kind of ruining it for myself, so I'm going to press on. Let's have a bit of this. Just going to throw this up on the screen. Peter McKenna says, fatal injuries to workers by main industry 2022 to 23. Main industry number of fatal injuries: construction 45, agriculture, forestry and fishing 21, manufacturing 15. If there was one pop chart that you wouldn't want to come top of, that would be the one, and yet construction consistently does. Now, people of Cumbria, please pay attention. This next one is kind of for you. We all know that parts of the UK will get snow during the winter. Some have already had some, while the rest of us are currently scanning the horizons for the inevitable traffic chaos that will ensue when it does finally pitch up on our doorsteps. But it doesn't have to be this way. It certainly doesn't if you have a Bobcat dealer close by. Sadly, I think this will go the way of the Pothole Pro. We've got a solution to a known issue, but here in the UK, far too slow or far too stingy to actually do anything about it. Now, we've kind of been overtaken by all things accident fatality, but I do think it is worth pausing for this. Mick Saunders, first of all, says, I'm wondering now if all this training is really sinking into operatives, or is it just cavalier approach? I've got lots and lots of views on the training thing, but I've sat through toolbox talks on site now. I don't even know how many times. And they generally last 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes if it's a really serious subject that they're on. And I'm going to do a very quick impression for you now of the people that are generally sat in toolbox talks. This is my impression. Now, that's bad enough if you're in a 15 or 20-minute toolbox talk. If you're expecting site operatives, excavator operators, and all the things to be in classrooms for a day, for 3 days, for 5 days, how much are they taking in? That's my first question. Mick Norton says, accidents. Over the long term, the rate of fatal injuries to workers showed a downward trend, though in recent years prior to the coronavirus pandemic, the rate had been broadly flat. The current rate is similar to pre-coronavirus levels. As I say, my concern is that I've watched them come down from maybe not quite 100, but sort of 80s and 90s, down and down and down and down and stop. Just hovering around the 35 to 40 mark. How do we go beyond that? How do we go from 45 deaths to 20 to 10 to 0? Here's a question for you. It's not our question of the day. Will we ever see in our lifetime, mine will be shorter than some of yours, but in our collective lifetimes, will we ever see a day where the HSE reports 0 construction demolition fatalities? Possibly the year that autonomy takes over. That's my belief, but I'd love to hear from you. Our friend Callum McIntosh is here as well. Good morning, all. Good morning to you, Callum. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Callum says, I missed why Anthony Bourdain was mentioned, but man, I'd love to have met him for lunch. What a loss. The Jerusalem episode is great. That is precisely the one we were talking about. It's completely unconnected. I mean, you didn't need to find out why Anthony Bourdain was mentioned, but the reason that I mentioned it was I've been watching now. You know, I was watching the TV when Hamas first attacked Israel, and then watched all that's transpired since. You know, and the gung ho approach of the Israeli head, Mr. Netanyahu, and all of the stuff that's gone with it. But I don't think I've actually seen a proper on the ground. Listen, I'm a huge fan of some of the Sky News reporting, and they are speaking to locals on the ground, but they're generally speaking to them after they've been bombed out of their home or after they've lost a loved one. People have lived with this, I mean, effectively since 1967. If you would like to go and have a look at exactly what living in and around Gaza is really like, that Jerusalem episode, which Callum has just highlighted, it really is an absolutely fantastic watch. And yes, I've read all of his books. And Anthony Bourdain, I don't think we realised quite what a legend we had in our midst until he was no longer with us. Mick Norton says, you highlight Cumbria and snow, where this week a driver in Cumbria was stranded for excuse me, 119 hours. If he'd been driving an electric vehicle, he would not have survived any excuse to have a dig at the electric vehicles. Let's have a look. Chris Ford says, something tells me the card system isn't working if we're still killing people. It may help to reduce the number, but it makes you wonder if the figures are staying the same. Human nature causes us to take risks sometimes without thinking of the consequences. And can you ever train that out? Can you actually train that out? I don't believe you can. And I've said this before, and I know I've taken some flack for it. I don't think you can actually entirely eradicate accidents while there is a human element involved, because humans, that through lapse of concentration and need to get something done rather more quickly than perhaps they need to, and so on down the line, accidents will happen. I have tripped over paving slabs along a high street. I'm an adult. I've been walking for really quite some time, but accidents can happen, and accidents do happen. But I do. I've said it before, and I shall say it again. And I shall say it till I'm blue in the face. And again, it goes back to me giving up my CCDO card. When you've got a system of cards, and there is a card for damn near everything these days. But if you go to work at HS2, if you go to work at Hinkley Point or any of these other major projects, you will be tested again. What does that say about the real industry, the top tier industry? What does that say about their faith in the card scheme? Peter McKenna says training inductions are just box ticking exercises. I agree. I totally agree. I think that's referring to the Jerusalem episode of Parts Unknown. Everyone was sober too. Yeah, sober and largely vegetarian, which was unusual. Dan Cullen says toolbox talks are useless, as many ops don't listen or don't understand. Many of these guys have so many cars, they don't have proper experience. Yeah. And again, I've always come at this from the angle of cost. If you're an operator that drives a dumper, a dozer, a dump truck, an excavator, a wheel loader, and so on, but you end up with 5, 6, maybe a half a dozen cards. But if you're spending all of your time on an excavator, A, should you be required to pay for the other cards on the off chance? And B, are you actually as competent on a dozer as somebody that is spending all of their time on a dozer? Peter McKenna says the only answer is to get rid of the human element. It's going to be a very quiet show if we do that, but that's what it is. And that's going back to the Jerusalem episode of Parts Unknown. Grassroots told as it is. Mick Saunders says, I'm not going to harp on this, and then he proceeds to harp on this. When I started in demo, I was in the yard for nearly a year. When I was allowed on site, I was with an old hand who had the power to sling me off if he thought I was not learning from him or listening. I'm going to ask a question here, and I don't know the answer to this, so this is just I'm just throwing this out there. I have sat through a card training scheme. It was awful, horrible experience. I won't bore you with that. But I wonder, have any instructors ever looked at somebody and thought, this guy really isn't paying attention, and kicked him off the course? Or is the fact that they've turned up, that I mean, even if they fail, or even if they're asked to do a reset, are people being kicked out because they are on their phone, not paying attention, obviously not taking in the information? If anybody has ever experienced that, I'd love to know all about it. Why are all these guys getting multiple cars? I feel 2 to 4 cars should be limited to any one. As any more, you're not actually experienced as you're hoping for jobs because you've got the cars. My point entirely. If you can operate an excavator and you're up against somebody that does operate an excavator, experience wins in my book. And going back to Mick Saunders' point, I realise this will mark me as very old-fashioned, but an old hand who had the power to sling you off if he thought you weren't learning or listening, and probably had the power to clip you around the ear as well if you were taking the piss. I don't think that's... I think we let that go too early, to be honest. The health and safety culture of the average ticketed seat warmer, until behaviour or oriented occupational safety is given the emphasis it deserves, the blasé indifference will continue unabated. There's the quote of the day. The blasé indifference will continue unabated. Chris Ford says the figure of 45 people killed in construction encapsulates a number of trades. What was the actual number killed in demolition? Who knows? Who knows? I have been asking for this for at least 20 years for construction, for the HSE to separate out demolition and construction, because they are very different disciplines. The very fact that they have their own distinct training schemes and training card regimes, it's clear that we all understand that demolition is different to construction. We all know that, and yet the HSE decides to encapsulate all of the demolition figures in with construction. I have no idea why. Having said that, I do remember, and I don't know if this is still the case, but I do remember that there was an EU directive once, many moons ago, where they were counting livestock. And apparently at one point they couldn't be asked to count goats, so they decided to count goats as sheep. True story. Peter McKenna says, I got told off an old hand. Machine will bite you back if you misuse them. They most certainly will. Callum McIntosh says, Mick Saunders, sadly, industry generally has no patience for mentoring people anymore, and we've seemingly bred common sense out of people. There needs to be a radical change of approach. I think and I'm going to pick up on that. There is more show to come. If you can be asked to stick around, there is more video to show you, but I do think this is worth talking through. I think one of the things that we have there is that bred common sense out of people. I think we went through a phase, which I think we inherited from the Americans, where there's blame, there's a claim. So I think people I wouldn't say they were hurting themselves on purpose. That would be ridiculous. But I do think there was almost like there's a safety net here, a financial safety net. I'll half pay attention to the toolbox talk or to the training course, but if something happens, it's somebody else's problem. But I think we've now got to the point where nobody seems to take personal responsibility, and not just in the form of accidents. The personal responsibility for the environment. We all sit here and criticize the government and the Americans and the Chinese and their gas guzzling ways. And yet we're every bit as bad. We don't, as a society, I don't think we take enough personal responsibility on a lot of things, including training. Callum McIntosh says, all being sober was in relation to Peter's comment about reported fatalities. Right, okay. Everyone involved was sober, assumes the HSE. Were they sober? Or were they off their tits on drugs or lagered up. We don't know. Much the same as the demolition figures from the HSE are encapsulated within construction. We don't know if there was any causal effect from alcohol or drugs, because the HSE have decided, in their infinite wisdom, not to count that. 33 of total deaths recorded in this period were to workers aged 60 and over. 99 of workers. Okay. Now, excuse me, I'm thinking this must be total figures, but I think that's an interesting point. Workers aged 60 and over. Now, I realise some people come to industry, not just construction and demolition, but other industries late in life. But you would have thought after 60 years, you'd probably know what you were doing, which goes back to the earlier comment. Have people become blasé? If you've been doing the same job for the last 40 years, do you just kind of tune out the safety? I do wonder. Excuse me again. Never seen anyone kicked out of toolbox talks or training. Training is for money in their pockets. Yeah, absolutely. Mick Norton. Many instructors, assessors shy away from the decision to either pass or fail because of the fear of losing a client. Yeah, although the one that tested me, and when I set my CCDO card, told me at the beginning that even if I passed, if he didn't like my attitude, because he knew who I was, he was going to fail me anyway. He was lovely. 135 workers were killed in total across all industries in the country. Yes, they were. Good question. Rechucking off people off courses if they're not paying attention. Maybe depends on who was paid for it. Yeah, and again, but bearing in mind how hard up we are for staff. We have a skill shortage. We all know that. It's been here forever. If a training provider were to kick somebody off a course and send them back to their employer saying, this bloke wasn't paying attention, he was sat there on Facebook all the time, so we've kicked him off the course, I'd like to bet that chances are that guy would keep his job, because there's nobody probably to replace him. Just my thoughts. Dan Cullen says, I feel technology is also partially to blame, as people are getting used to it. They can't use their head, expect technology to do the work. I think in some aspects that would be the case. I do take your point. And again, I think personal responsibility, just because you've got laser guidance and GPS and self-writing machines and all of the fancy nonsense that we've got, I do take your point on that you still got to operate the machine properly. However, go back to the point that was made earlier, the biggest killer is falls from height. You're not generally using much in the way of technology, excuse me, and when you're working at height. Peter McKenna says, the thing is, as soon as you sign the sheet to acknowledge that you've done the induction and or toolbox talk, if anything happens, you're technically liable. And I think, well, I'm going to put it up, but I think this is a probably a more serious question of the day, which we may revisit at some point. But this is from Gary Muirhead. Question: is the HSE for purpose? No, it isn't. I don't think it's moved with the times. I think it's, in fairness to the HSE, I don't think it's moved with the times, which I don't think is helpful for the HSE. But I think the biggest issue is it's understaffed, underfunded, and it's had its guts ripped out. And I think while the industry, I think, was up in arms when they first went for this FFI fee for intervention, which basically made the HSE self-financing, we were all up in arms because at the time it was our belief, and I stand by this, that if an HSE inspector spent enough time on a site, they would find something wrong in order to levy a penalty to therefore fill their coffers. I stand by that 100%. But because it is now basically self-financed, they've stripped down the number of inspectors. So it's like we've seen, it's a path we've trodden before. There are less bobbies on the beat. There is more crime on the street. Same thing with the HSC. Peter McKenna says majority of instructors won't Won't kick anyone off the course. My best mate is a trainer, examiner. He has a box for mobile phones. If you refuse to accept that ruling, the door's there. Peter McKenna says, categorically, no, HSC has been a farce for donkey's years. Chris Ford, being over 60, I've come to realise that I can't do what I used to be able to do. I have to pick my route to a machine and have a plan how to get in and, more importantly, how to get out. The balance and the speed ain't what it used to be. I can relate to that totally. Mick Norton says, in 1967, I stood alongside my mentor on a Cat D8H and laughed as he struggled to swing the donkey engine start handle as the engine fired and splattered his face with exhaust soot. His right fist moved a short distance and sent me sprawling to the wet floor on the Thai-Laos border all those years ago. Nothing more was said by either party, and as a young cocky plant operator, I very soon got the work ethic message, which I've never forgotten. Yes, it's the Mike Tyson thing. We've got far too comfortable not being punched in the face. I'm going to throw this one up and then I'm going to get back to the show. Mick Saunders says, Gary, I think we all know the answer to that. It was a good idea, but the money crunchers got involved and the pay on the HSE is abysmal. Wow, we are at 45 minutes and I've still got a couple of videos to play. So let's crack on.
Since the finance bill came into effect in April, the construction industry has seen a surge of fuel thefts. The rising cost of living has placed an additional risk of theft by employees and contractors, as well as opportunistic thieves. By using diesel dye and placing warnings of its use, you are sending a clear message that this is your fuel.
If you can remember, before the HSE conversation started, we were in the snow. We're going somewhere warmer now. If you've been watching this show for any length of time, you'll be aware that the Case Construction Equipment Company is on a mission to clean up our beaches. The company has already supplied equipment to clean up beaches here in Europe, but it has now widened its horizons to make the Ivory Coast look, well, Ivory Coastish once again. Some properly admirable work there from Case. I realise it's a long way off, far too long if you ask me, but if you arrive on a European beach next summer and find it to be spotlessly clean, you may well have Case to thank for it. Now, we do have a final film, and it comes up right after this.
If you would like to buy a limited edition Break Fast show sticker, head on over to buymeacoffee.com/demolition news/extras.
Right. Here on the Breakfast Show, we like to bring you the technology that is safe and efficient, sustainable and profitable and ingenious. We really do. However, there are some applications when all of that matters far less than sheer brute force. sure I'd want to spend my every waking hour driving that thing. You'd need a lifetime supply of paracetamol, as Peter McKenna just said. He's fallen off his chair, ornaments falling off the mantelpiece, dogs going crazy. Was it really necessary? Felt like a bloody earthquake. I think it probably would. Simple and effective, much quicker than a pecker. I totally agree. That machine was better than using a breaker all day long. Yeah, totally agree with that. That is some machine, not really. Look at a breaker, be more effective. Looks time consuming. I think if you've got like a bridge deck or something like that and you're going to pre-break it and then go in with breakers and shears and stuff, it's an old film. It's an old film and old, very clearly old technology, but I thought it was worth sharing with you. That pretty much wraps up the main part of this morning's show. I'm going to roll the outro in just a second before leaping gazelle-like an injured gazelle today, actually, but I'm going to leap gazelle-like over to the chat, see what you're all saying today. Plenty to get through, I would say. If you can't stick around for that, then please stay safe, look after yourself, your family, your friends, and your colleagues, and have a good day. But if you do have the time and the inclination, please stick around, because I will be back with the Craic immediately after this. There we go, a bit of background music. This is our old after show theme. Haven't heard it for a while. As our friend Wolfworld, I will go back to the beginning of the chat, but I'm going to throw that one very quickly. I wish we had one of those giant red hammer trucks to bust up roads in America. That would be cool. I think that film actually was from America, oddly enough. Does anyone know if Loughborough University ever finished a study into vibration levels that is applied to the construction industry? Mick, I do not. I do not know if that was ever finished. But I will ask my mate, Dr. Terry Cornby. He's very close links with Loughborough University. I think that's where he did his first degree, actually. Now, I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the chat. Peter McKenna was first off the mark over on YouTube this time. Had to be the first. Good morning, everyone. Hope you all have a great day. Hope you have a great day too. Hope your chest gets better soon. There's Jim Turner, who the last I heard was at the hospital with his good lady wife and her toe. Obviously, she's taken her toe. She's probably taken all 10 of them, but never mind. 40 was next off the mark. Good morning to you, Graham. Good morning to Dan Cullen as well. Good morning, Peter McKenna, who for some reason changed channels. Gary Muirhead, good morning, Mark. Good morning, gang. Good morning to you, Gary. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Mick Saunders joined us as well. Rattling through. There we've got Mark Whiting. Yes, took it. Speaking of Mrs. Turner's toe, thanks, Mark. She's just in the fracture clinic, having it looked at and dressed. Ken Hatcher is feeling the cold down in Wales. However, the news from Neil Edwards may have warmed him up just a little bit. Mick Norton is in the house as well, timely as well, given that we're talking about accident stats and the like. I'm going to do let's have a look. Peter McKenna says, in addition to my on this day in history, 1899 on this day, the death of Lancashire businessman and philanthropist Henry Tate of sugar refining fame, and also the Tate Gallery. Thank you very much indeed for that. And in 1958, Prime Minister Harold Macmillan opened the Preston bypass in Lancashire. It was the first stretch of motorway in Britain, now part of the M6 and M55 motorways. Thank you. I was trying to block this from my memory. In 1993, the record by Mr. Blobby, a pink and yellow spotted BBC television star, if you can call him that, reached #1 in the charts. Noel Edmonds gave us a blight on humanity. That's all I will say on the subject. Now, I did mention I need to bear with me 1 second. I'm going to throw this up very quickly, just as a very quick reminder, when I can find the right one. There we are. Yes, tomorrow night, 7 p.m, we will be doing our predictions 2024. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes looking back at our predictions, our collective predictions for 2023. We're not good. And then we're going to look ahead to 2024. And if you think that AI is weird, wait until you see some of the ones I've got in store for tomorrow. you'll think I've lost my marbles. But yes, if you can join us tomorrow night, bring some predictions with you. If you think that, I think I used this one yesterday. If you think JCB is going to enter the dozer market, please let us know. Love to hear from you. Let's have a look. Who else do we have? Chris Ford is here. Good morning, my fellow warriors of Demolition. Yes, indeed. Yes, I watched that. Quite informative. That's the Parts Unknown show with Anthony Bourdain. As I say, terrible loss. Really smart guy and quite a good cook by all accounts as well. There you are. My question today was that, although it was kind of sidetracked because there was much more important things to talk about. Have you ever met your hero? Jeff Hurst, Midge Ure, Stephen King. Those are mine. Met them all. So, have you met yours? Ken Hatcher says no. Man, a few words sometimes is our Ken, but thank you very much indeed, Ken. Andy Bullock is here saying good morning. Chris Ford saying good morning. Glenn Johnson saying good morning. Gary Muirhead is buttering me up once again. Question of the day. Not yet, but should I go to England, or if he comes to Scotland, then maybe I will. If you really think I'm your hero, Gary, you really need to go and have a long, hard look in the mirror and give your head a shake. You really do. Chris Ross says, there you go, Mark. You can pinch the catchphrase. And now for something completely different. I think I've used that before, actually. Yeah. Peter McKenna has met Graham Bickley, who is Joey from Bread. Was that his name? Was it? I didn't know that. And Eddie Little. Okay. I think you're just naming people you've met. I can't imagine anyone considering Eddie Little to be a hero. I met Bill Oddie from the Goodies once upon a time, since Grand Footy Billions. Okay. Still questioning the heroics of the situation, but hey, whatever. Had the pleasure meeting all my heroes when we all passed out Peninsula Barracks. Sadly, not with us anymore. They still march by my side each and every day. Well said, sir. Well said indeed. Wolfwelder, our friend from Stateside, is here as well. Good morning, sir. And your stickers are on the way. Sent them myself. Dan Cullen says about the Manitou. Looks like a toy, small but handy on farms and small, hard to reach areas. Question of the day. This one, as I say, apparently this is a forgivable thing, despite the fact that he was once considered the greatest footballer of all time, despite the fact that he basically reinvented football, the way that Barcelona play football and dominated the world for decades, purely down to the Johan Cruyff. And yet one of the UK newspapers mistook him for Robbie Rensenbrink, and there's our friend Mick Norton, who was at his restaurant and still didn't recognise who he was. Lots of people liking our Manitou machine. There we are. Jim Turner, question of the day. No, I think they're all dead. I'd like to have the crack with Guy Martin. Colin Furze, another YouTuber that's a very clever fella. I can't remember his name. They are my type of hero, I suppose. Yeah, and that's how it should be. That's how it should be. I mean, if I could wind back the clock and wave a magic wand, Muhammad Ali probably, and closely followed by Bobby Moore would have been my personal choice. But there you are. Glenn Johnson also enjoyed the Manitou. There's Neil Edwards with the stats for November. 4 billion. Over 4 billion. So, I wouldn't say all is right with the world in the field of construction, but 4 billion? It's what we expect, or it's what we've come to expect, and that's what we got. So, can't really grumble. We've had this before, actually. Question of the day, Peter McKenna says, Bill Travers and Virginia McKenna, who happen to be my aunt and uncle. Yeah. Jim Turner likes the Manitou. Hot. It would be great around my little yard. Peter McKenna says, good question of the day, Mark. You have discovered a beautiful island upon which you may build your own society, and you can even make the rules. What's going to be the first rule you'll put in place? I think we'll save that, because that's a bit of a thinker, that one. A good news story, says Neil Edwards. Isn't it nice to get one of those? As I say, I realise it was inevitable. From the moment that they announced that they'd applied for administration, we all knew what the outcome was going to be with Scrib Group. But when they were actually wound up, and when you think about the speed with which it happened. It's only a week or so since they applied for administration, and you just arrive at High Court and a judge just says, that's it. 75 years, done. Sad. And obviously for the family, but also for all the people that rode money, and obviously for the employees as well. Good few of those looking for work at the moment. We'll come back to that situation in just a moment. How many of that 4 billion will come to fruition? Neil Edwards says all of them. Crystal, going back to our question of the day, never met Mr. JCB. That would be Joe. But I met Anthony Bamford, now Lord Bamford. Had a chat. I've met and talked with Princess Anne and our king when he used to hunt. Brian Clough used to park at the farm and walk his dog. Nearly ran him over when I was brake testing a JCB. Talking to an old turnip head, resigned as England manager. When asked if he fancied the job, he replied, no, I'm too old now. Best England manager that we never had, in my honest opinion. But Anthony Bamford, yeah, I've met him a couple of times. Haven't done Princess Anne, but I was kicked out of a toilet to let our king, who was Prince Charles at the time, let him have a tinkle. Apparently, I was kicked out of the toilet so that I couldn't gaze upon the crown jewels or something. But that's a true story, absolutely true. Met the Queen Mother as well. Yeah, not really my heroes, to be honest. And if anything, I just thought it was a bloody liberty to kick me out of the toilet so that old Charlie boy could have a tinkle. But that's a whole other story. Mick Saunders, and this is where the show went sideways this morning. Read the HSE stats this morning. Still not great news. Way too many deaths. Yes, 100%. There's Carly Northwood saying, great to have some up-to-date and accurate stats. Thank you, Neil. We miss that. The sooner that situation is resolved and we can get Neil back on a monthly basis to share those stats, I think. Because I think knowledge, it's a cliche, but knowledge is power. And I think at the time when the industry is in a bit of a bind, the more information we can possibly get our hands on, the better for all concerned. When they drop a bridge into the water, I always think it must be a right ball ache to remove the rubble. I totally agree. Not so bad if it's steel and you can just grab hold of it and tow it out. But where there's, as it quite clearly was, where there's concrete and what have you involved, not quite so straightforward. Neil Edwards has also confirmed 94 million quid's worth of new work going into Wales, which is good. Mick Norton says the Royal Engineers dropped a Bailey Bridge into the River Thames at the Festival of Britain in 1951. That's another story. When you say that's another story, does that mean they weren't supposed to do that? They have to go and look that one up. Still way too many deaths. And he goes on to say one is bad enough. Totally agree. Falls from height, still the biggest cause of fatalities. So don't do it. Don't do it. We had this discussion the other day when we were talking about what was his name, Glenn Edwards, the guy that rescued the tower crane operator that rescued the guy from the fire. The argument was, would an autonomous crane have been able to rescue him? And my counter to that was, if we were gone fully autonomous, then that guy wouldn't have been on the roof in the first place. And unfortunately, I do think, and if it were me, if I were king of the world for a day and I wanted to eradicate accidents, you start with the worst, don't you? If more people are dying from falls from height than anything else, outlaw it. Find another way. There's your starting point. And if you can take out however many that is, I think it was about 20 odd or something like that, possibly even more, you've halved the UK construction and demolition fatality rate. Dan Cullen says, I think the HSE is a failure to the industry and needs a massive reboot up the jacksie. Yeah. The problem we've got, I think, is it's like our concerns with the CITB. I think we can all agree that it's not fit for purpose. It's not moved with the times. It's not doing that which we expect of it. But what else is there? And I do think the CITB and the HSE have survived a long time based on little more than better the devil you know. Peter McKenna says fatal injuries by workers by main industry. Fatal injuries, construction 45, agriculture and fishing 21, manufacturing 15. Mick Saunders says, I wonder if all this training is really sinking in, or is it just a cavalier approach? I don't even think it's a cavalier approach. I think I'll go back on what I said about personal responsibility, but I think one of our biggest problems with training is it's not being done for the right reason. The training organisations are basically selling you a commodity, so which is why they keep coming up with new cars and new schemes and sub-branches of schemes and all. They're constantly reinventing new ways to extract money from demolition and construction companies. So their primary focus, the reason they get out of bed in the morning, is to make money. And the contractors themselves, who actually have the employees, they are required to have a little tick in a box that says all of our staff are competent, and they have a little piece of plastic to prove it. I don't believe anybody is really focusing on the need to prevent people being injured, maimed or killed. You've got one end that is looking to make money, you've got the other end looking to be compliant. The bit in the middle is where people are dying. That's my point. Accident, says Mick Dalton. Over the long term, the rate of fatal injuries to workers showed a downward trend, but in recent years, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the rate has been broadly flat. The current rate is similar to pre-COVID coronavirus levels. And did we ever get to the bottom of if anybody within construction that had been very kindly granted key worker status, if they had subsequently died as a result of exposure to COVID-19 while they were at work on a demolition or construction site? Or is that one of those other things that the HSE has decided not to tell us about? Callum McIntosh joined us all the way from Barney, Scotland. Footy Williams says he burned his elbow at work. How does one burn one's elbow? That's a good question. Love the Bobcat, always revolutionary technology and kit. Yeah, it certainly is. Footy says it'll probably do leaves rather well as well. I totally agree. You highlight Cumbria and snow, where this week a driver in Cumbria was stranded for 119 hours. That's not funny. I think when you've been there for probably 48 hours, you're probably starting to wonder if anybody will ever actually find you. And as he says, if he'd been driving an electric vehicle, he would not have survived. Yes, we did mention Anthony Bourdain purely because I thought it gave a better insight than our news media are doing into the Gaza conflict. Not that that's got anything whatsoever to do with construction and demolition, but I watched it last night. I was going to say I enjoyed it. I did enjoy it because I think the guy is very engaging, but it is very, very insightful and sad. You know, when you see people in the same part of the world just not getting along because they each have their own imaginary friend. Seems bizarre to me. Something tells me the card system isn't working, says Chris Ford. If we're still killing people, it may help to reduce the number. It makes you wonder if the figures are staying the same. Human nature causes us to take risks sometimes without thinking of the consequences. Yeah. And again, I go back to the point that I made earlier about the accidents will happen. Thankfully, Glenn Edwards was on hand, but the guy that was on the roof of that building, I mean, I don't know what training he had, not that really matters, but a fire broke out. How many toolbox talks and card schemes would you have gone through and still not been prepared to find yourself alone on a roof of a building that is now on fire? Yes, now I misread this, but Callum McIntosh was being sarcastic, I think is probably the nicest way to put it. Obviously, Callum has been pursuing the business of drugs and alcohol abuse on site, and the fact that we're not actually recording whether they are a cause of any of the accidents or fatalities. We've got all of those accidents, 45 fatalities, and no clue whether 1, 45 or none were as a result of alcohol or drug abuse. Again, how do you fix a problem if you don't really know what the problem is? And I realise this is an exaggeration, but bear with me, it's purely for artistic value. Imagine if all 45 of those fatal accidents had been caused in some way or another, been caused by the abuse of alcohol or drugs. If that were the case, we could have a nationwide clampdown on drugs and alcohol. Stick with your card scheme if that's what makes you happy, if you still need to tick your little boxes, but have prescribed daily drugs and alcohol testing on every single site, in every single town, in every single city, up and down the land. And all of a sudden, that problem's gone away. The problem we have now, we don't know. We don't know. All of those may have actually been, as Callum has said, may have been stone cold sober, not a single drug in their system. Could have been half. Could have been all of them. We honestly don't know. Peter McKenna says, our training and inductions are just a box ticking exercise. Listen, you'll get to read the article tomorrow, but I have to do these. And one of the points that I've made about one of the reasons I'm dropping my card, when you think about who should we take as an example, let's take Rishi Sunak. So Rishi Sunak, struggling a little bit in the polls, and is keen to be seen to be down with the working man. I know he thinks, or more likely his press secretary thinks, we'll put a hard hat, new and shiny, a high-vis jacket, new and shiny, and some sight boots, new and shiny, on Mr. Rishi Sunak, and we'll take him to a demolition site where he can roll up his sleeves and look like a working man, because that will be good for us in the polls. Is he going to go through, is he going to go via Hemel Hempstead so that he can get a site visitor's card? I'm guessing probably not. Why not? Because when he sets foot on site, he will be accompanied from start to finish. There will be no point where Mr. Sunak is on his own. Not only will he have his bodyguards and his aides and lackeys and minions with him, he will have demolition folk making sure that nobody drops anything on the Prime Minister's noggin. I'm the same. I'm nowhere near as important as the Prime Minister. In my head I am, but I'm not. But when I go on a demolition site, there is no point. At no point am I ever unaccompanied. Even if it means that somebody has got to stand by my side for an hour and a half while I film a thing doing a thing. They will stand there. I am not unaccompanied at any point. So why on earth would I need a card? You can read about that tomorrow. The training inductions, yes, I arrive, I sign a book, I tick a box. They can now say that I've done the thing. What does that mean? If something hits me on the head, and it has, it doesn't help. A little bit of paper doesn't help. A little bit of plastic doesn't help. I've still been hit on the head. Toolbox talks are useless, as many operators don't listen or don't understand. Many of these guys have so many cars, they don't have proper experience. What is the expression? Jack of all trades, master of none. I could almost do this as a daily thing. The idea of mentorship, to my mind, mentorship is 1,000,000 times more valuable than a piece of plastic. Because we've got some guys that have been around the block a few times on our show. They wouldn't tolerate people not paying attention or doing things unsafely. And yes, if it meant they had to be a bit shouty and a bit sweary, so be it. I know somebody else says that they did get a thick ear at one point. Well, but they learnt their lesson. Let's have a look. The health and safety culture of the average ticketed seat warmer until behaviour-orientated occupational safety is given the emphasis it deserves. The blasé indifference will continue unabated. And I do wonder also. I had a conversation with somebody a long while ago. It was just after the NFDC had got their high reach simulator, and I was talking to a guy who I respect enormously, and he said, the simulator is fantastic. It's a great tool and everything else. The problem is, it has the potential to lull the trainee into a false sense of security, because if you're learning on a simulator and you go wrong, you just press the restart button, new game, and you go again. If you did that in real life, you or somebody else is potentially dead. Are we, with our concentration on cards, are we handing guys cards and giving them the false belief that I have a card and I am therefore invincible? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to any questions. I just throw these things out there to see what sticks. But let me have your thoughts. The figure of 45 people killed in construction calculates the number of trade. What was the number killed in demolition? They don't tell us. It's all part of one big figure, unfortunately. 33 of the total deaths were workers over 60 and over, which it's tempting to believe that young and naive, fresh out of school, fresh out of college, like they are the biggest dangers to themselves. Apparently quite the opposite. Dan Cullen says, I've never seen anyone kicked out of toolbox talks or training, as for training it's money in their pockets. Yeah it is. And again, how much does this influence? If you are a training organisation and you have a client, a tier 1 contractor, a major contractor, a major demolition contractor, for whom you do all of your training, and let's say there's a project starting on Monday week, and we've got half a dozen operators or operatives or whatever, or a mix, who require their cards to be upgraded in order to start work. So when you sit down to analyse exactly how competent you believe those operators and operatives to be, is there a possibility that your decision could be influenced by the fact that you're training 6, but over the course of the year you could be training 300 at several £100 a time? Many instructors and assessors shy away from decision to either pass or fail because of their fear of losing a client. What I just said. I didn't even see that one there. Precisely what I just said. 135 workers are killed in total across all industries in the country. Yes, that is correct. I think that is Carly Northwood saying, good question regarding chucking people off courses if they're not paying attention. Maybe depends on who has paid for it. It's a recurring theme, isn't it? Dan Cullen says, I think technology is partially to blame. Again, I go back to the fact that most of the people that were killed in construction and demolition were working at height. Not a great deal of technology involved in that. There should be, and maybe less people would be killed. But again, going back to, this piece of plastic makes me invincible, or the technology in this machine that I'm driving, that also makes me invincible. It's giving people a false sense of security, I think. Yes, is the HSE fit for purpose? I think we're kind of a one mind on that. There is Mick Norton talking about getting a clip around the ear from one of his seniors. Can't say I blame him. Categorically, no. HSE has been a farce for donkey's years. Yeah. Mick Salter says, Gary, I think we all know the answer to that. Was a good idea, but the money crunchers got involved and the pay on the HSE is abysmal. Yeah. And again, it's the point that I raise with the relinquishing of my own CCDO card. This is not the case in my case, but for a lot of guys, and I'm fairly sure this is something that Dan Cullen may have raised in the past. You turn up to do a training course, whatever it is, hot works, excavator operator, doesn't matter, whatever it is. You turn up and the person that is going to be your assessor is half your age or has never actually done the job that you're being tested on. Is that right? Bearing in mind they talk about mentorship, would we not be better off handing the reins of construction training to people that have actually been there, done it, and got the t-shirt? That's my belief. Dan Cullen. Now, I wanted to pick up on this. Dan Cullen says, looking for work again, nothing till possibly Monday, and no guarantee of that. I don't want to go off down the mental health line again, but how on earth do you expect workers to have any loyalty and to not have unnecessary stress, anxiety, and potentially mental health issues if, and I'm sure Dan says something else. There we are. There's his other point. Starting to piss me off, this industry. Use and abuse of operators and construction workers in general, like a bit of paper, to use it and throw it in the bin. You know, we have a skills shortage, we have a mental health pandemic, and yet we are mistreating operators and operatives on a daily basis. Chris Ford, going back to the case film, says, I wonder if cleaning all the crap off the beach is a daily exercise. Bearing in mind some of the beaches I've been to in recent years, including the one in Corfu last year. Beautiful place, but man alive, every morning the beach was an absolute pigsty. Mainly through tourists, I'm afraid to say, leaving empty beer bottles from the night before and that kind of thing. So yes, I would imagine it is a daily basis. Yeah, that's the what was it called? The Antigo guillotine. Would hate to think of the vibration levels using that. Dan Cullen's got a point here. That is some machine, not really great as break. Look at a breaker, be more effective. Looks time consuming. Yeah, couldn't argue with any of that. Mick Norton says, Professor David Edwards initiated much of the vibration research whilst at Loughborough University. I'll ask him for an update. Please do that. Peter McKenna. Gives me a very, very unpleasant reminder of blobby. Andy Bullock, yes, you're absolutely right. Hillhead registration is open. I did actually mean to bring over the link for that. If I don't forget, I'll do it for you tomorrow. But if you are planning to go to Hillhead, not that there's any rush. You don't get a discount or anything like that because it's free to get in. But if you would like to register for Hillhead, you can do so now. I tell you what, let's have a look. Let's see if I can do it right, because otherwise I will forget. Yes, it is quite simply hillhead.com. Simple as that. Go over to hillhead.com. You can register right now. Question of the day: did you ever meet your hero? My dad was my true hero, says Peter McKenna. Well, me too, but obviously. Here we go. You forgot to say West Ham won the World Cup. Well, I didn't say it, Mick, because I kind of thought it was common knowledge. You know, we provided the captain, the guy that scored 3 of the goals, and the guy that scored the other goal. I thought everyone knew that. I didn't think it was worth mentioning. Question of the day. I met my heroes in person, LinkedIn, and one Nigel Williams. And number 1, Nigel Williams, and 2, yourself, Mark, and Jim Turner in person. A lot of similarities and many others in the construction industry. I'm a hero. I'm so not. So why don't companies and training companies put a limit on cards a person can hold? To see many people with 10 plus cards, no experience. How do you afford all these is beyond me. Good question. Mick Norton says, I wondered, are oil stoves a lot of paraphernalia? Don't even know where that's come from. Jim Turner, that wouldn't be fair. Plenty of people can adequately operate many types of machines. When the old fellow was on the coal sites and quarries, he needed to be able to go on every bit of kit that they had. That's a good few different categories for one person, and he could put them all to work proficiently. But you're right, there's plenty of car-carrying people out there that aren't safe or proficient. And that, I think, is what it all comes down to. There are people out there that have a bit of plastic, that they're not safe, they're not proficient, and they're not competent. So what the bloody hell is a piece of plastic all about? Dan Cullen says, you've got to remember the amount of fake cards that's out there now. The technology is God, and fake cards, how do you actually tell on what? If these fake cards makers can access trainer IT systems. They don't even need to access the IT systems. We played a film on here not so long ago where there was a place you basically went along and the questions were answered for you, and you were given a card as a result. Even Billy Graham wouldn't save Rishi Sunak, even if armed with a CSCS card. Good. Would love to give any politician a site induction. No induction, no walking on site. Peter McKenna says, on Heysham Docks years ago, I was carrying a winding handle for the legs off my trailer. Slipped on ice, steel handle flew in the air and landed on my little finger on my right hand. I swore, and thank God that it landed there and nowhere else. I had to drive back to Preston. It was making me cry. I bet that bloody hurt, actually. And I had to keep stopping. Took an hour to drive a 30-minute run. Now I've got a fat fingertip as it smashed the end of my finger. I had a friend with a fat fingertip. He was 10-pin bowling. Put his hand down to get his bowling ball, and another one came back up the ramp, nudged into it, and basically squashed his finger between two bowling balls. Absolutely mashed the top of his finger. I bet it hurt like bloody hell as well. 63 members of the public were killed in work-related accidents in 2022-23. Excludes deaths to work-related due to work-related accidents to patients and service users in the healthcare and adult social care sectors in England, reportable under RIDDOR. Indeed. Let's not forget that in a court of law, it is the employer who bears full legal responsibility for the consequences of his employees, not the CITB, not the HSE, not CSCS, or the card schemes. Well worth remembering. Paraffin you burnt. I'm going to go back and read that again in just a second. One guy was working on my site and qualified burner, got sacked for taking many breaks. A few weeks later, he was on burning equipment and hadn't the knowledge. He was told to hurry up or he'd be sacked. I'm not sure I'm following that one. Let's have a look. Jim Turner says the whole thing about cards is just competency on that category of plant. Has no bearing on whether someone is sound as a sound operator and can put machine to work in a fashion that will make money in a safe way. Too much emphasis put on a card, meaning someone can go out and do it properly. Chris Ford once caught my finger between two curbs. Oh dear, I cried. I first holiday with my girlfriend, who then became my wife. I got bored one afternoon. She's fairly dark skinned, so she will lay in the sun all day long. I'm pasty as all hell, and I don't, so I get bored and fidgety and everything else. So I was strolling around in a rock pool, and I saw a big crab go under a rock. I thought, oh hello, big crab under a rock. So I lifted up the rock to have a look at the big crab that had crawled under it, and when I put the rock down, it caught the tip of one of my fingers, and I had to sit down because I was absolutely convinced I was going to pass out. Not the best way to impress your new girlfriend, I have to say. Can't have been too bad though, because here we are 40 odd years later and she's still putting up with me. Peter McKenna says spot on there, Mick, 100%. Now I'm going to need to go back to where are we? I wondered, are oil stoves a lot of paraphernalia? And he comes back and says, paraffin you Burke. if anybody else is understanding what's going on there, I'd love to hear from you, but save it for tomorrow because we've been going for an hour and a half. An hour and a half. These shows are getting longer by the day. Everybody, please, given all that we've said today about health and safety, given all we've said about competence cards and about site fatalities, please go and have a very, very good day. Please go and have a very good, safe day, would you? Look after yourselves, look after your family, your friends and your colleagues. Please come back tomorrow for 10 a.m. I'm not sure I want to do this, but I'm going to do it. Peter McKenna says, when a finger is smashed, blood can pool underneath the fingernail, leading to what is called a subungual hematoma. After a day or two, the nail may start to turn purple, blue, or even black. Your healthcare provider may consider draining the blood if it's causing pain, or otherwise leave it alone. Had that with a toe. I did have a toe that went black as a result, well, toenail that went black, and yes, little needle through your toenail. That's not funny. Wouldn't recommend that. Everybody go and have a fantastic day. I'm back here again tomorrow at 10 a.m. for this, but I'm also back again tomorrow night for our prediction show. So please, if you would be so kind, join us for one or ideally both of those. Till then, everybody, have a fantastic day.